Hey, this is John. Thanks so much for joining me for part 3 as we build this Bandai HGUC RX-78-2 Gundam. In this episode, what I want to talk about is disassembly of the kit to prepare for painting. It's generally just, taking it apart and getting all the parts separate so you can paint it. But there are a few strategies to know that might be helpful in speeding up the painting process and helping with the final look of the kit. Now, the first thing we have to do, of course, is disassemble the model. Most of that is pretty straightforward. However, if you run into a section that you're having trouble getting it apart, like I always forget how to best get the torso apart, all you need to do is go back and look at the instructions and see what the order is that you build it in, and just start at the other end and go in reverse. That usually makes it much simpler in taking everything apart. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to disassemble the whole model and break it down to the components that I will paint, and then I'll go over a few strategies for how to do that efficiently. Okay, here's a look at one leg and the parts breakdown. I've left, of course, these parts as one unit because we glued that together and got rid of that seam line, so that can be painted easily as one unit. This can be painted as one unit. You can pop this off if you want, but because I'm going to be painting it white and I don't want there to be paint where it might get scraped, I'd rather it just be plastic on plastic. I'll just leave it just like this. Now, we'll paint part of it and then move it and get the other parts so that I can make sure that everything that can be seen will have paint, but I'll leave that together. Be sure and pop these little pieces off the sides of the legs and get those painted. Of course, the foot will be painted red. I'll leave this gray part in here. You can pop it out, but because so little of it will be seen, I just leave it in and paint it with the rest of it. It gives me a nice little place to hang on to or to put one of my clips onto it. And then these two will be painted, of course, gray. Now, while I'm looking at this, let me talk briefly about priming. The rule of thumb when you're painting any model is prime it. Now, if you've been building models for a while and you're comfortable with the type of paint you're using and how it adheres, and you understand when you need to prime and when you don't, you decide that. I will say, if you're coming from a traditional modeling background and you're used to not priming, because even to me acrylic paints will adhere fairly well to most, say, airplane or tank models. Bandai's plastic is a little slicker, and I've found if I'm using acrylics, I do need to prime. Now, a primer like Badger Stynylrez Res works fine. The Tamiya Rattle Can works fine. Any kind of primer works. I'm actually going to be painting this with lacquer paint, so I won't be priming it because the lacquer paint adheres just as well as any primer. But again, if you're not sure what you should or shouldn't do, go ahead and prime it. If you're not sure what color to use, I would recommend either a light gray or a white, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to cover up primer. Like if you use black primer on these white parts, it might take you a little while to get that fully covered. So light gray or white should work for everything. Breakdown of the arm is very simple also. I've just got it down to these gray parts, which will be painted the inner frame color, and then these white armor parts. I'm leaving this part assembled. There's no need to take that apart. These, you can actually reassemble these to paint them as one unit and then pop them apart when you're ready to put the model together. Of course, this is one piece, so you'll want to paint that, and these two little pieces here. Okay, the waist unit is a little bit of a special case. You've got these yellow pieces that pop in through the back here. So the way I plan to, or maybe it's like that, there we go. It pops in through the back, but it means that yellow will shine on the back side like that. So the way I plan to paint, the order I'm going to paint this in, is I'll start off painting all the yellow parts from the whole model. Then when I'm ready to paint white, I'll paint the front of this white. Then I'll pop this piece in, flip it around, and making sure that I'm spraying straight on to the back, I'll paint the back white so that when somebody looks kind of underneath, they don't see this yellow shining through. Everything is white. And by just shooting straight from the back, it masks off, the parts themselves mask off this yellow on the front. So that'll make those parts look nice. And then the rest is just straightforward, just painting this red. Of course, these are white, and this is gray. The shield is just 3 pieces, so those are easy to pull apart, paint them, and then when you're ready to assemble it, put them all back together, and you'll have nice clean lines. Okay, the head, I've pulled off the V-fin, the little red piece that goes on the V-fin. And you remember in episode 2, part 2, we closed up the seam, so this is glued together. So before painting, what you'll want to do is use just a few little pieces of masking tape or some blue tack or something like that to just mask off the eyes in that red area. And you can put a little bit of it here, maybe some liquid masking fluid right there. But this is easy to repaint later, but this will be painted white. Of course, you can paint that. I recommend, this is kind of tough to airbrush, and it's a really small piece. I recommend brush painting that, but if you want to airbrush it, that's fine. And then of course you got your V-fin. All right, the torso is a fairly simple breakdown. Of course, I'll paint these blue. I'll leave these poly caps in, and I'll let the blue paint act as primer, and then I'll just go back later with some acrylic paint and paint over those. You can pop them out if you want and paint them separately, or leave them unpainted. It's up to you. But I'm going to do it that way, just the way I like doing it. I'll leave this poly cap here. It's not really going to be seen, so I won't even worry about painting that. And then these will just be painted the colors that they are for the mobile suit. And finally, we have the backpack and the beam saber handles. They're not lightsabers, they're beam sabers. But anyway, we've got those. I'll mount these up on some cocktail sticks and paint those white, and then this will just be the same gray color as the inner frame. Okay, the last thing I want to look at for this video is just some simple ways of painting the parts. Some of them are small, and just using some tweezers like this will help you paint it. Like on this one, you can grip it on the part that slips into the back and the front of the Gundam's head. You can airbrush it, set it aside, it's done. This little red part here, as I mentioned earlier, I recommend brush painting that because there's not a good way. You could stick it on a piece of tape, but it's so small it doesn't have a lot of surface area, it might get blown off. So I'm going to brush paint that. I use tape for some parts. I just fold over the ends so I have something to grip to, and I just stick them on there. If they're substantial enough, they'll hold, and you can airbrush that from every angle, and they'll look fine. I also build quite a number of these, I call them pterodactyl clamps. Some people call them alligator clamps. I call them pterodactyl clamps. Thank you, Carl. But you can order a huge quantity of these off of Amazon or someplace like that, and you just get a bamboo skewer, stick in there, clamp it down with some pliers or something, and you've got these little clamps, and you just find something on the inside of a part, clamp it on like that, and it makes handling it and painting it very easy. And then finally, some parts I just broke off the end of the cocktail stick here to put the beam saber handle on, and that makes a nice holder for that. You can even, if you want to, you can even clamp it like that. Now for holding all of those parts when they're clamped up, I get one of these cat scratch pads. They're just a cardboard box with some corrugated cardboard set on edge like that, and I simply just stick them in just like that, and you can hold a bunch of parts that way. Now you can make these if you want. These are only a couple of bucks at the dollar store, so I go ahead and get them to save time. I label the end of it with an R or an L so that I know, because I have several of these, and I'll know that they're right or left side parts, but they just make it really easy to hold the parts so you can pull it out, paint it, set it back in there to dry, and it works really nicely. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Building a Gundam, and I appreciate you watching this video. I would be most grateful if you would subscribe to this channel and like this video, and maybe even share it with some friends. And for those of you who follow me on the various social media platforms, Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter, thank you so much for following my work. Don't forget I have a blog. All of those links are below in the description for this video. And a special thanks to those who are patrons and support me on Patreon. Again, there's a link to that below. If you're not already supporting me on Patreon, I would be very grateful if you would consider doing so. It literally makes my model building possible. We wouldn't be able to afford for me to do it otherwise. So there's some neat rewards on there in various levels, and you get some additional content and videos that you wouldn't get otherwise. So please do consider that. But again, thank you for watching this video, and until the next episode, happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.